Hi, everybody, welcome back to the live stream. We have a special guest with us. It's Hermela Aragawi, and she's an independent Ethiopian-American journalist and a part-time community organizer and former journalist anchor for CBS News in Los Angeles. She also helped launch the hashtag No More as part of a global grassroots movement created to defend Africa and the African diaspora from U.S. imperialist exploitation. Hermela, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Jimmy, good to see you too. It's been a long time.
So there was last time we talked, there was a civil war happening in Ethiopia. And so and of course the way it was reported here in the West was always backwards. But so there's been a ceasefire, there's been a peace agreement, right? So, and this was from May of 2022. Okay. So I just want to
November. Yeah, the peace deal was from November.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's November. That says November, not May. So I just want to show people where it is so they know what we're talking about. Ethiopia is right here, right near the Horn of Africa. There's Somalia, Tigray, and then Eritrea. I think I'm saying that right. Hey, look, there's Yemen. So Ethiopia sets out on a long road to peace after 2 years of war. Ethiopia's Tigrayan rebels start handing over heavy weapons. As peace begins in Ethiopia, Tigray opens up. Tigrayan protesters tell Biden Ethiopia peace accord falling apart and immediate action needed to stop 800 days of Tigray genocide. Hey, and Eritrean troops endanger Ethiopian peace deal for 2 years. So tell me what's going on with the peace deal.
Yeah, so, I mean, it looks like it's sticking as far as what everyone can see. So in November, the Ethiopian government and then these representatives from the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the rebels that had started this war 2 years ago in order to get back into power after their group fell from power following 27 years of rule. So two sides got together, sat at a table, and actually came up with a peace deal in Pretoria, South Africa, which everybody was really happy about. And then they went to Kenya and they added some stipulations as to how the TPLF rebels would disarm. They would only disarm if Eritrea leaves, if these other regional forces leave, and only the Ethiopian National Defense Forces can be in that region. So a lot of people were not happy with that, but it looks like slowly that they are disarming, or they've claimed that they're disarming. The government has been very hush-hush about whether this peace deal is actually, happening the way that it's supposed to. It's certainly not happening the way that they said it would in South Africa. There were all these timelines about when the rebels would disarm, and those timelines have long been passed.
So the country of Ethiopia has a new government. The people who want the old government, they're the rebels, and they're up here in Tigray, and they're what would you say? Would you call them terrorists or just rebels?
Right. I've been looking for a word. I mean, they're designated a terrorist organization by the Ethiopian government. And, they say they don't sit down with terrorists, but they sat down with terrorists because these are not your just, average rebels. They were a part of a group that was in power in Ethiopia from 1991 till 2018, after 6 years of protests and different strategic efforts to take them down. So they're backed by the U.S. They were heavily armed. Much of the country's intelligence apparatus was controlled by them. And so while they are designated terrorists, they still had to really sit down with this group because the U.S. was putting a lot of pressure on Ethiopia. And a lot of that's just economic pressure, this U.S.-centered unipolar world where these developing countries need to borrow from the IMF and the World Bank in order to reconstruct, particularly after conflict. And so it looks like the Ethiopian government was making some concessions to the U.S. by sitting down with this group because they had made some serious gains militarily against the group. And much of that was because of drones that they were able to procure and the Eritrean soldiers. Eritrea really came through for Ethiopia. I mean, without Eritrea and the drones, I think signs point that this group would have been back into power. It would have been a coup.
So just so you know, the Ethiopian government was at a civil war with the rebels from Tigray. They were the leaders that were thrown out. They ruled it for decades. They ruled the country, and then they got thrown out in 2018. The rebels are all in Tigray, and guess who's backing the rebels is the goddamn United States government. So do you need to know who's the bad guy in this situation? Whoever the U.S. government is on the side of, most likely are the bad guys, and that's exactly what happened. And so they're supposed to hand over all their guns and stuff. Is that happening?
It's slowly happening. They still control, I've seen different percentages. They control about maybe 20% of part of the region. And the reason that you're seeing some of the headlines about the Eritrean soldiers are still there, there are indications that they're actually leaving and going off to the border. The reason that a lot of the rebel leaders, including Getachew Reda, who's on Twitter, say that is so that they have a reason not to disarm. But certainly Ethiopia as a country and the region, the Horn of Africa region as a whole, will not be at peace if these people still have arms. I mean, they were on record, U.S. back in 1991 to overthrow the then communist government at the time. When they started this war 2 years ago, to their calculus, they were going to win. I mean, they had like I said, the intelligence apparatus, much of the country's armament, and the diplomatic cover from the U.S. So they thought they were going to win. I think there's factions of them that are still trying to hold on, and there is some concern among Ethiopians and Eritreans that they may restart a war. But as of now, things are moving forward, and that's a really big deal for the region.
Now, here's just an example of how poorly the West reports stuff, right? So in the West, we heard that the Tigray-based TPLF, the rebels, was rebelling against a government that was starving the people of Tigray into submission. So that's what the United States propaganda was, that the Ethiopian government is now starving these people in Tigray, and that's why we have to help these people in Tigray. But here's the former UN World Food Program director, and he says that's not true.
And the conclusion that I reached in the book is that this was a politicization of the process, ostensibly to put pressure on the government and maybe other actors, donors as well, to raise funding, but also to presumably facilitate. Now, the point that I say in the book, I mentioned in the book, is that actually when we were not able to access, it has to do with violence. And when the moment came late in the year, when many of these assumptions for people dying of hunger presumably came to be, there was no evidence at all of famine, no evidence at all of people having died of hunger. So clearly there was another narrative that was at play, and largely political, I would say.
So that was all made up?
All made up. And you can watch, thanks for playing that. You can watch that full interview on my YouTube channel, Hermela TV. But yeah, in a normal world where there was actual journalism happening on international news, this guy would be plastered everywhere, on all the different outlets. I mean, for 2 years, they told not just the Ethiopian government, but Ethiopian people and Eritreans who supported the government's effort to push back against these insurgents, that we were all wanting the people in Tigray to be starved to death, and the government was using starvation as a weapon, when in fact, as that guy, Were Omamo says, he is by the way, UN World Food Program country director in Ethiopia from 2018 until the end of 2021. There is no one that is going to be a more credible source of information than this guy. He actually went around to different parts of Tigray, had people on the ground that he was checking with because they had satellite phones. It's not that everybody was not able to communicate. And for 2 years, all these, so-called journalists on Ethiopia told everybody that this government was starving people, that there were people that were dying of hunger in the Tigray region, when in fact they were not. And a lot of that, I believe, had to do with whatever they were trying to get in there. Maybe it was just like he says, a way to raise money for the UN World Food Program, to raise money every time they say famine, they can just collect a lot of money. But I think there's more sinister reasons as to why they needed this unfettered humanitarian aid to go into the Tigray region. And the reason I say that is there is history that these rebels use this starvation allegation in order to procure weapons. In the 1980s, there was this, you might remember, Live Aid fundraiser for Ethiopia. There were all these people that were, starving in the country under that communist government. And there was some truth to that. There were actual videos of people that were hungry. After the world came together and raised $100 million with all these different artists from the US and the West, these rebels used 95% of that money, according to a BBC report that they kind of got in trouble for, but that they stood by. They took 95% of this $100 million and bought weapons, and it changed the game for them. And they were able to overthrow the communist government within years and get into power. So this is a playbook that they have used before. So a lot of people don't question, if you see Ethiopia, famine, and hunger, we should question, how is it 30 years later that we're having the same conversation about people starving in Ethiopia? It's not the reality. They were hoping to maybe procure more weapons this time and continue their war. And so that's what's so frustrating about the way we talk about human rights in the West, and particularly in the United States. There are all these otherwise good people that just get the story so wrong. And I don't blame them, because the wrong story is on CNN, ABC, CBS, all of them. And they think they know what's going on. And so they sign up on this rebel and terrorist narrative and, pushing on that, when the reality is really the reverse. So it's just like a playbook 30 years later. And sadly, the American public is so uneducated about what's going on around the world that they end up on the wrong side of things.
Okay, you're talking about when I was a kid and We Are the World and all that came out, and they were talking about Ethiopia. And I remember this very vividly at lunch. The teacher do you want to forego your fruit roll up and for 35 cents and give it to Ethiopia? So we were paying for guns with our fruit roll-up money? That's what wow.
Yes, it's insane. Wow. And the U.S., I mean, these are, good Americans that want to do right and feed these starving people in Africa. And, they put out all this money. All these artists are the face of it. And most of that money went to weapons. So the fact that,
that's amazing.
Isn't it? I remember people shaming that when Weird Al made We Are the Worms, which mocked that song. The bus aide was like, that's not right. Those people made that song to help people. They guilt shamed everyone for liking a Weird Al song about it.
It's crazy. And the other thing about this is that if the U.S. policy on Africa was different, these countries would actually be able to economically develop. Yeah. That is a human right that I want us to be talking about. I mean, the UN has said economic right is actually one of the human rights. There's a U.S. International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. But the only type of human rights that Americans want to talk about is the culture and social rights. And these people don't care if they're doing elections like us or whatever other stipulations that we put on. They want to be able to have water and food. The other crazy thing, and I know a lot of things we talk about when it comes to Ethiopia and Africa are so crazy that they don't sound real, about those rebels in the 80s, is that the allegation, and I believe it because what they're capable of, they intentionally starved out communities to then be able to record them on camera. They were the ones that were actually blocking food that was trying to come through the then communist government of Mengistu Haile Mariam at the time. So they starved their own people to then put them on camera to get all this money to buy weapons.
Wow. I
when I was a kid, that was such a big stayed in everyone's memory for a long. People just thought Ethiopia didn't have food for 20 years.
That's what we thought. We just thought, and that's what Sam Kinison did that joke. Remember that joke? He's like, don't send them food, send them U-Hauls. You live in a desert. This is sand. Nothing grows here. That was about Ethiopia.
Also, South Park, Starvin' Marvin, for 30 years.
That's right, Starvin' Marvin.
What was Starvin' Marvin?
They sent money to Ethiopia. I forgot about that.
It was South Park character that they created.
That's all trickled down. Wow.
And none of it's true.
I knew about what the guy from the Boomtown Rats that put together Live Aid.
Oh, right.
I knew that he actually made the situation much worse, and it was pretty well known. But I didn't think of that.
So that was all an op. That was all a psyop.
It was, and they tried to redo it 30 years later.
Well, it worked pretty great the first time. I mean,
What I don't remember them trying to redo it. What was the? When did they
Meaning, like, they tried to kind of replay the playbook. So it worked so well for them last time that they were like, okay, we're gonna once again say this government is
starving people. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But this government is smarter, I believe, and a lot of people will tell you, than the then communist government at the time, meaning like this prime minister knows better. And so they really were forceful in trying to make sure that they got these people fed, because they knew what had happened 30 years ago. And they did not want a scenario where there were people on video starving, and then the whole world comes together and turns against the Ethiopian government. So it was because this government's a little bit more knows kind of how it works, and they've been through it before, that it didn't work, and they didn't starve the people. I mean, the rebels themselves didn't starve the people this time. They did, though, make getting aid, the very aid that was coming from the Ethiopian government, dependent on if people were giving up a person in their family for the war. And that is on record. There's mothers that have done interviews that I've seen that say they were not just not giving us aid, but they were coming to us and taking whatever, livestock that we had. And then they said if we wanted aid, that we needed to give up our son or our husband. And some people, the poor people, did, because it was just two horrible choices.
Hey, we're doing live stand-up comedy in Los Angeles, Tempe, Arizona, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Nashville, Northampton, Massachusetts, and a lot more places. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets and become a premium member while you're there. You get access to all of our stuff. See you then.